I'm Pastor Dan Peterson for anybody here that I don't know, and it looks like I know everybody, but delighted to have you here for the last of a three-part series called Update on the Earth. After having been joined by Dr. Christy Ebby, who gave us kind of a global perspective, I really felt, along with in conversation with Carol Ann and Susan Evans, that a kind of specific what's next might be helpful as a session. So now that we've looked at the big picture, what can we do individually and collectively as a church to move things forward when it comes to the problem of addressing climate change? And so for that reason, we've invited two individuals who will speak with us today. I want to thank Susan for helping make today's conversation possible. She coordinated the speakers. And again, thank you to Carol Ann as we look to wrapping up this year's forum program. I'll say more about that at the end of our conversation. We are recording the video, as you know, and if you'd like to see it or if you'd like to encourage others, just go to our Queen Anne Lutheran Church YouTube channel, and you can see that as well as a number of other forums there too. So Socorro Medina is going to give us information about what the city of Seattle is doing to protect the environment and talk about how we too can make an impact. Socorro is the Community Recycling and Engagement Program Manager. Well, I thought pastor was enough of a title. This is great. Community Recycling and Engagement Program Manager for Seattle Public Utilities. Before that, she worked for the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle and was a research student at the University of Washington. She joins us today for the first half an hour, and we are delighted to welcome you here. Socorro?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me. So my name is Socorro Medina. I work for Seattle Public Utility. In Seattle Public Utility, we provide your water services, your drainage and wastewater services, and your solid waste services. So that's the area where I work, doing education and outreach and talking to our customers about how to sort and how to be more sustainable. So this is, I was really happy to be invited to give this presentation to you today. So I will be saying solid waste a lot, and what we mean when we say solid waste is compost, recycle, and garbage. So if you live in a single family home, your containers probably look something like this or some version of this. If you live in an apartment or in a condo, chances are your containers look a little bit more like this, recycling dumpster or a garbage dumpster. And we refer to these different containers that you use at home to dispose of your materials as streams. So I'll be saying through the presentation are three streams. So we have these different three bins or three streams. And we'll talk a little bit about what are the different items that go into each containers. I'm sure there's a lot of interest in that, but I just wanted to step back a little bit and just give you sort of like an overview of solid waste generation in Seattle. So this is a graph that shows the tons of solid waste generation going to 1987, even before our curbside recycling program started. And so please ignore this red line. I'm not going to talk about that, but so a ton is, that's what we use to measure the weight of our solid waste, and it's about 2,000 pounds. So basically, what you see here in the blue is the items that people put, or the materials that people put in the black container in the garbage, and then in the blue is the materials that go to the recycling. So you can see here that going back to 87, most of our materials were garbage, and there was a little bit of recycling happening. And then as you go to 1988, when our curbside recycling program started, the amount of material that was being recycled started to increase. And so if you just look at the top of these bars here, you can see how our solid waste generation has changed through the years. And so there's been an increase as population goes up. Also, there's solid waste changes with economic increases or improvements or increases. So that also explains the up and down. But, I like to point out that in 87 here, our population was about 500,000. And if you go to 2018, we're closer to 750,000. So there's been a big increase in population. And you can see there's been an increase in solid waste. But what I wanted to point out that you can see here clearly is how the percentage of the amount of material that we are recycling is starting to increase. And then in the green is the materials that you put in your green container. So you can see that the amount of materials that we are composting also started to increase, so that when we get here to the last year that I'm showing, 2018, there's a much more smaller tonnage that is going to the garbage compared to 1987. So big decrease here in what we're sending to the landfill, and then an increase of what we're recycling and what we're composting. And this has happened. There's been many factors that explain this. We have policy. Food waste is not allowed in the garbage in Seattle. Recyclables are not allowed in the garbage. Yard waste is not allowed in the garbage. So there's a lot of policy that has driven this, but also we have a robust program of education, outreach, talking to customers, providing tools. And then I think the most important thing is really there's a willingness of our customers to participate. People are very interested. People want to do the right thing. So there's been a combination of things that have driven this story of diversion, so recycling and composting in Seattle. And there's a lot of benefits to this. And I just want to list here a few. Recycling and composting conserves natural resources because, for example, recyclables are used as feedstock to create new materials. So there's not a need to go mine virgin resources to produce, to use as feedstock. And then in addition, we're creating valuable products. For example, the compost that gets created with our food and yard waste, it's a very, it's a soil that has a lot of nutrients that we can use to grow plants and vegetables. So there's also a circular aspect to it. And then there's also some potential for climate change mitigation. For example, when food waste decomposes in a landfill, it produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's very powerful. So by composting food waste, we mitigate those negative environmental impacts. Just to be a little bit practical, I wanted to give you some ideas, examples, suggestions on how you and your group can be a good environmental steward when it comes to solid waste. And I'll be talking about these 3 different things. So how to avoid wishful recycling and composting, how to engage in waste prevention, and how to become an informed consumer. So these are probably, or a version of this is the sorting guidelines that you probably receive at home every year. And they talk about what belongs in each container. So this is one way that we can make sure that we don't put items that do not belong in our green and blue containers. There's a high number, there's a percentage of contamination in our recycling and in our compost. So we're working really hard to remove that, because what happens is that the feedstocks that are being used at the end of the recycling process, if they have contamination, they're not as valuable. The processor may not want bales of paper that have plastic bags in the middle of it. So we're working really hard to reduce that contamination. So following your guidelines, that's a good way to do that. Another way to do that we're trying to focus on is, we know that our sorting guidelines can be confusing, and it's really hard. It's really easy to get lost in all the little details. So another approach that works for some customers is just to focus on top 5 categories that we want in each cart. So I'm listing it here. The main categories that we want in the compost are food scraps, pizza boxes, napkins and paper towels, compostable bags, compostable food packaging, and yard waste and plants. So those are the 5 main categories in the compost. And then for the recycle, the 5 main categories are paper, cardboard, plastic bottles and containers, metal cans, glass bottles and jars. So this is a way that to just kind of go back to basics, is just think about big categories. So this is another approach that works for some customers. And then finally, if you're not sure, we have resources for you to find out. So we have this online Where Does It Go tool that looks like this. I'm showing here a snapshot of it. So you can we have thousands of items listed here. So you can go put the item and you'll find out how to properly dispose of it. And if you find items that are missing, we have a very comprehensive list, but the marketplace is constantly coming up with new packaging, with new material. So if there's an item that is missing that you cannot find here, you can send us an email at askevelyn@seattle.gov, and we'll give you an answer on how to dispose of that item. And also that would help us update our online tool. So these are some resources to avoid wishful recycling or composting. Okay, the other suggestion is really think about how can you engage in waste prevention, because if we prevent waste in the first place, then there's no need for all the transportation and all the resources that are involved in dealing with those materials at the end of their life. And the first one here that I want to point out is food waste or wasted food. And this is a big one because there's so many resources that go into making food, sorry. There's a lot of, we use a lot of our land, we use a lot of water, we use a lot of labor, fertilizers. There's an immense amount of energy and effort and inputs that go into making food. So if we can prevent that food from being wasted, then we're making sure that all those resources are used to their full potential. And we have some very specific tools for you here. And if it's possible, I would like to email Susan these 3 different PDFs that I'm just showing a little picture here of them. But basically, the first one is how to be a better shopper when it comes to meal planning and figuring out your week. What's the best way to store different produce and bread so that it stays fresh for longer. And then we also have a guide on how to effectively and safe freeze food so that you can use it for later. So these are really very useful resources for preventing food waste.
Yes, please do email them to me.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. Okay. And then the second idea or suggestion is to become familiar with the tool libraries that we have in the county and in the city. And I put a link here to them. But if you haven't had a chance to visit a tool library, they're great resources. If you need to use or to find a specific tool, then this is a way that you don't have to go and buy the tool and then store it in your garage or in your shed forever. You can just borrow it from there and use it and then return it. And they also have different classes on how to repair. So it's really a great community effort to collectively decrease our input on our impact on the environment and share different resources and ideas. So that's another one. And then the next one here is to donate or update items that you need using different communities like the Buy Nothing groups in Facebook or the thrift stores. So this way, I've seen people donate anything from like making too much jam, and so they want to donate that, and you get to donate it to your neighbor, which is great. Or if you're going on vacation and you have some produce or some bread that you won't be able to eat, you can donate it that way to a neighbor. So it's a really it's a great community effort to, again, reduce our impact in the environment. And then the last one here that I wanted to mention is has to do with thinking about how we can use like ceramic or glass plates, cups, utensils. And so some of the some of the efforts that I've seen is different groups, like for example, your church group that get together and buy reusable items, say from Goodwill, and then they can store it at a location that's accessible to everybody. So when you have a party or when you have people coming out of town and you suddenly need to use more plates or more cups or more utensils, you can just borrow it. So it's like a mini tool library. You can just borrow it, and then you wash them, you return them, and then the next person can use them. So that's a good way to prevent having to use disposable items when you have too many people coming over. Oops. Let's see. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. Okay. Okay, and then so the last one has to do with becoming an informed consumer. And so if you think about all the items that you put in your blue cart every 2 weeks, those items are going to become new items. They're going to become new articles that are going to be for sale, but somebody needs to buy those items. So we as a consumer can make an effort and can drive the market if we're looking for alternatives that have recycled content. But if we don't do that, then the marketplace is not going to be selling us those items because the consumer is not asking for them. And also, recycled content materials can be more expensive, especially at the beginning, because there's not a huge market for it. But once people start buying them, there's more market for them. Then the production scales up, and then the price will go down. So every 2 weeks when I put my cart out, I think about, okay, what am I going to, I'm putting all these things out there in the marketplace. I better make sure that I bring some of those materials back into my home. And then, so we've been talking a lot about solid waste and disposing of things, but something that I think is really important is to think about when you have an item that you want to get rid of. This item has had a whole life before it came to your home, to be of use to you. So that item had to be, it had to be mined from somewhere. There was some manufacturing that happened. It got transported, maybe internationally, domestically. Then it had to be distributed to the different stores, sit on a shelf for a while. And then after you use it, then we talk about end of life management. So this is just disposing of it. We have to dispose of it. So yeah, there's environmental impacts of disposing of things. And that's something that people like me as solid waste coordinator focus on. But more and more, we're really going back into the whole life cycle of these items and try to think about what's the environmental impact of just creating this item, and how can we be consumers that try to reduce this impact into the environment. And that's, this is a hard part, and this is something where we're actively working now, trying to figure out how can we provide better information to our consumers so that they can easily understand the different impacts of the decisions that they make as consumers. So I have a few links here, a few reports and calculators and information that we're starting to compile. But I would say we're in the early stages of digesting this information. So as we go forward, we'll be putting better and more consumer-friendly information on how to reduce our impact on the environment, just in general, not just when it comes to solid waste. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Looks like we have about 4 minutes or so for questions. I noticed that Rich had one in the chat about whether or how is it the case that when methane is produced when food rots in a landfill versus it being composted. Can you explain a little bit why that is the case?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it has to do with the chemistry and the biology, and it has to do with the lack of oxygen. So if you can imagine, composting involves lots of oxygen, lots of water, but in a landfill, there's no oxygen. So I don't know if I can, explain all the details of the chemistry or the biology, but it's a byproduct of the anaerobic digestion. So they're the food waste is being digested by microorganisms with lack of oxygen. And I can probably, like, there's an equation, I remember seeing there's an equation that that describes the chemistry, but I can look it up, but I'm not going to be able to think about it right now.
That's okay. That's fine.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Excuse me, I'm at the gym. If I understand recycling and composting for the home, but when I'm out and about and I've had a latte and I'm supposed to throw it in one of the cans that's offered on the street, it's very confusing to know, first of all, if those things ever get, I see a lot of garbage in the compost and recycling bins. How do you know what goes where in those situations? And how much is that just, to make us feel good? Or are you really able to use those cans, those bins accurately when you collect them? Or are they just all full of garbage?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we have a system of 2 containers that we call it our public place leader garbage and recycling containers, and they're big metal containers that you see in some corners, and so we do recycle those materials. We do recycle the things that get put in their blue container. That is being recycled. It's obviously, as you notice, it has a high level of contamination. And what we want to do is we're really making an effort to align our guidelines so that no matter where people are, if they're at home and they're at a business, and if they're walking around the city, our guidelines are the same. So the materials that we want in that container, they're the same that we want at home or in a business. And we're actually working with our region to try to standardize our guidelines, because we know that, some people live in Burien and work in Seattle. So it can be challenging to be looking at different guidelines at different places. Let's see, there was another part of your question. Yeah, so for composting, we don't have a composting public containers program yet. So when you see like 3 containers outdoors, there's probably like a business. Like I see a lot in South Lake Union, there's a lot of IT companies that would have 3 bins outdoors. So they're putting the containers out. They're responsible for moving those materials into a dumpster or a cart to be collected. So in those cases, it's them, and yeah, we don't have any. We're not collecting those containers, so I couldn't speak to that. But okay. the public the recycle and the compost, we definitely collect them and we definitely recycle it. But we understand that if you're drinking a coffee, it's gonna be hard to clean that cup. So
exactly.
we ask people to just finish it the best you can. Just finish the coffee the best you can, and don't put any liquids in there. So we want as clean as possible given the situation. So if you're at home, then we have a higher expectations because you have access to a sink. But if you're out and about in the community, we cannot ask you to wash the container because it's not feasible.
Really fascinating and helpful and practical. And even if we implemented 1 or 2 of these things, I think we'd be a little better off. So thank you so much. And we'll make available the materials that you used today for everyone. So thanks again so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our Next guest is Ryan Metzger, the co-founder and CEO of Ridwell. Ryan and his family live just blocks away from Queen Anne Lutheran and began their journey to reducing waste as a weekend project with his then 6-year-old son, Owen. The two would identify reuse and recycle opportunities around town and offer to pick up from neighbors along the way. Wanting to make a bigger impact than a father and son duo could do alone, they formed Ridwell in late 2018. I love the name, by the way. I think it's perfect. Since that time, thousands of families have used Ridwell bins to find new destinations for their old things on the way to saving over 2 million pounds from landfills. Ryan will speak with us now about the state of reuse and recycling today, and will share Ridwell's vision of making zero waste a reality for millions of families in the year to come. Ryan, welcome to this conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. And I'm glad you mentioned I'm a neighbor. I live just a few blocks away. And the name Ridwell actually came to me as I was going on a walk right near where your church was one day a few years ago. So I'm glad to hear you mention that. I've got a presentation to do, but I love questions throughout. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. If anyone wants to just speak up too, I love this type of thing being kind of back and forth. So thank you, Socorro, for your speech earlier. You talked about the 3 streams. Think of Ridwell as a 4th stream that tries to find gaps that might exist because of technology and behavior and markets. And so that's sort of how we position ourselves as an not an alternative, but a complement to the great work that SPU does. So this is a choice we make many, many times each day. And so it's something that I'm obsessed with, thinking about how can we find alternatives to reduce waste. And so the consequences of that are quite high, and people are learning more and more about those consequences. Ocean plastics in rivers and lakes is a big thing. There's been an estimate that by 2050, there's more plastic in ocean than fish. And then landfills, we heard a little bit about methane, but an EPA stat was that landfill emissions of methane primarily is the equivalent to 21.6 million cars driven each year. So definitely, if there's ways to reduce waste, that will have huge positive impacts on our future. So this is kind of how we began. This is my son, Owen, who lives just a few blocks from your church. And so a few years ago, we wanted to learn how the system worked. And so we visited a lot of these facilities. So we went to a MRF, and this is one. MRF is sort of industry lingo for material recovery facility. Think of it just as a recycling center. So this is the Recology MRF in South Seattle. And it was fascinating to see how that whole process works when you put things in your bin. How does anything good come of it? And it's amazing work that happens in that facility. We also visited a landfill. The closest landfill we have is in the Maple Valley area. And so we visited that, and we saw how that whole system works. Our garbage in Seattle actually goes to Oregon. The one in Maple Valley is other parts of King County. But both of them, pre-COVID at least, gave tours, and it was a fantastic way to sort of see how things work at a very up-close way. So this is a little look inside the MRF, and I don't know if they do these, if they've resumed them yet, but again, can't speak highly enough of these. I've done it 2 or 3 times. What happens is a big truck comes and dumps things in the middle, and then it goes through a bunch of human and technology to try to make things out of it. And so there's a ramp that goes by, and they're picking things out. There's lots of magnets. There's lots of things that sort of have things rise up, different types of plastic, lots of cool things happening there. And really the output of that is big bales of material, whether it be aluminum or plastic or cardboard. That's really what happens, is all the things you've mixed together get re-separated into their own categories. This is a compost facility. So they also have done tours of the past. This is Cedar Grove up in Everett. They also have a facility in Maple Valley. And so again, it begins with a big truck dumping things. And then there's a lot of conveyor belts and those types of things. There was a question earlier around methane and that types of thing. There's this special kind of industrial tarps that kind of heat up the compost. I don't remember the exact timing of it, but I think that's a big reason why this is a positive from a greenhouse gas perspective if things are sent through compost facilities like the one in our area. And then this is the landfill. This has a little motion here, but you see things dumped, you see conveyor, you see like trucks that kind of grind things down. What I was really struck, you can see Mount Rainier from there. There's eagles, there's deer, and it really kind of puts in perspective, if there's any way we can send things not there, that is really a great thing. There we are again. So 2018, you might have seen, this is right when Owen and I were doing these tours. There were a lot of challenges to the recycling system that got a lot of press. And before that time, a lot of recyclables were sent in bales, like in the bottom left there, to China. And so the rules changed for a variety of reasons, environmental being a big one. And so things didn't have a place to go that they once did. And so there was a lot of questions, what's going to happen to our plastics and our mixed paper and stuff like that. And so the industry really has been doing a lot of things to try to adapt to that. New buyers around China, new processors domestically. And so we're all trying to figure out how we can kind of make a more resilient system going forward. So there's sort of three things that we can all do and sort of be open to as responses to both some of the challenges that happened in 2018, as well as just doing better even than the pre-2018 world. And so it's better sorting. And so I'll give kind of my take on that. Different laws that are being passed, usually at the state level, and then innovations of different type that is also complementing each of those two. So the sorting, I thought it was fantastic to hear how in sync we are with SPU. Those posters are great and helpful at times, but I'm more of a rule follower type. And so I always ask myself three questions before I'm going to put something in a recycling bin. The first one, is it made of one of these 5 things? And these are the same things that we learned about 20 minutes ago. Is it metal? Is it cardboard? Is it paper? Is it glass? Or is it hard plastic? If it's a mix of those, or if it's something else, then it's not a recyclable material in a traditional sense. Then, is it clean, dry, and empty? So think of like a pizza box. Could be cardboard, but not clean generally because it has pizza residue on it or that type of thing. Now, a pizza box that fell off a truck that hadn't been used yet, that would be cardboard and clean, and so that could be recycled. And then the last one, is it bigger than 3 inches? I don't have a really good sense of what that is, not having touched a ruler in a while, but my index finger is about 3 inches, I've learned. And so that's a good trick I use. So think of like a metal bottle cap off of a Coke bottle or something like that. Metal, yes. Clean, dry, and empty, yes, but smaller than 3 inches. So that's one. And the reason for that one is just in the MRF, you see things kind of go by quickly. Those smaller things can fall through the cracks and not end up in the right type of bale. So this is what I use to sort things. And it's just been helpful to kind of have those rules in place and kind of go one by one. Laws. So this is one where the government, again, the state level most likely is taking a look at things. There's 3 types of laws that I want to just give a quick overview of that have been passed, and I'll give an example of each one. So the first one that has had the most activity is something called extended producer responsibility. And so the idea there is to put the onus in some ways on the producer of a good, to give incentives and things like that to provide funding to then have a good outcome in the end. And so an example of that, I think 2 years ago there in Washington, there was a latex paint EPR law that was passed. And so when you buy a can of paint at the hardware store or wherever, there's a small tax on it that then provides a fund for you to then drop off paint in Washington for free or have Ridwell pick it up. That has kind of created a new way where absent that, the economics didn't work. And so that's one thing that's being done. There's a plastic one that was talked about this year that didn't quite make it, but many states are looking to those things as a way to align sort of short and long-term incentives such that there are better markets for things that we're getting rid of. The middle one is product bans. And so cities have done this, states have done this. The most common one are things like plastic bags, styrofoam of certain types, straws, those types of things where, there are alternatives to it. And so banning them from a sort of producer standpoint makes sure that things that are very hard to dispose of properly isn't something you even need to worry about. And then the last one is labeling, especially with compost. This can be really difficult. Things that look plastic but are compostable. Just having more standardization about this is compostable, this is recyclable, those types of things. There's some states that have taken a look at that as well. The last one is innovation. And so that's sort of where Ridwell and my journey began and fits. So a few years ago, this is a post that Owen and I did. He's now 9, but when he was 6, we would find a category that you could deliver to in the Seattle area. We would take our stuff and then we would post very much in this Queen Anne West area most of the time where your church is, and offer to take other people's stuff along with ours. If we're driving to Kent with styrofoam, let's fill up our truck or our RAV4 all the way, so we're not wasting space that might help things get to recyclers. So we did this a bunch. We did over 1,000 of these pickups across 25 or more categories, and it was an amazing opportunity to learn new things and kind of build a sense of community amongst people near where we live. So this caught on in a big way. It was an amazing experience. This is, again, 2018. Over 4,500 people joined what was called Owen's List. King 5 came along. There was a Seattle's Child magazine. Martha Stewart even wrote a little blog, or her publication wrote a blog post about it. So it was amazing to see that response and a little project becoming something much more than that. So Ridwell is sort of the way that we thought of to do at scale. At the same time, we were getting this amazing response from people. We were seeing these news stories that were saying, how's recycling going to adapt? What are we going to do? And so we thought, is there a way to sort of kind of turn this project into something much bigger that could do things in a bigger way? And so we came up with a system that has sort of 3 parts that work together. First, we provide reusable bags to do sorting at the user side. And so there's one for batteries, there's one for light bulbs, there's one for threads, which is our word for clothing and shoes. And then there's one for plastic film, which is thin scrunchable plastics. Just in the room I have now, think of this type of plastic that goes around paper towels. That's a common thing of plastic film, as is Amazon mailers, bubble wrap, Ziplocs, all those types of thin plastics. We give you a bag for that as well. We also have a rotating 5th category, which is most often reuse, which is our goal. Every time we can find a reuse opportunity locally, that is a great thing. And so in this picture, we had a featured category, small kitchenware for REWA, which is Refugee Women's Alliance. And so if you have an old loaf pan or an old pot or something like that, this phenomenal local nonprofit works with refugees to get their kitchens set up in apartments and those types of things. And so you can get rid of something that you're not using and gets distributed back to someone who could really use that item. Finally, we give people a bin, which you have probably seen around your neighborhoods. And so you put those in the bin. You can schedule a pickup up to every 2 weeks, and we'll come and grab your full bags and trade you empty ones in its place. And that's the way to keep those things separate. So the film isn't being mixed in with the batteries, with the light bulbs, all that type of thing. So like Owen's List, we're very focused on things that are not already covered. And so this is a poster, I think, from Mercer Island or something like that. So we look at this and say, this is our opportunity. How might we do things with things that are in this category? So in this scenario, you look at all the plastic film that's on that sheet. That's something we do every 2 weeks. Things like styrofoam, also another thing we do. And then the donation piece, we've done things like disposable silverware or plasticware. That's something that food banks spend a lot of their money on. One of my favorites that we did even with Owen's List, and we do every year around Halloween, leftover Halloween candy going to a group called Birthday Dreams. And so what they do is they plan birthday parties for kids facing homelessness, and they collect leftover Halloween candy, create little grab bags that then are distributed as a party favor. So if you have extra, you don't know how many trick-or-treaters you're going to get, that's something that we've collected and distributed back to them. We're also really big on transparency and finding local partners. So you always can ask us, where is something going? We love to tell the story. We expanded to Portland late last year. And so this is where our stuff goes if you're a Portland Ridwell member. So you see most of them are going to partners in the city of Portland or just around it. We have some that go, to Salem, Oregon, or to Reno, Nevada, or El Paso, Texas, but not overseas to China, Malaysia, wherever other things go. Our model is very local and transparent about where things go. Community is a big focus. So we mentioned that in terms of the featured category. Just a few local success stories. Kids books was a big need at a group called Children's Book Bank of Portland. The summer reading season is upon us soon, and so they were really low on books, and this is an area, and this is a nonprofit that serves a pretty low income area of Portland. So we had kids books as a featured category. And so then Ridwell members put those books in their bin. Over 10,000 books were distributed back to this library that were then restocked, ready to go as we head into June and July. Kitchenware is another one down there. Community Warehouse is sort of a great nonprofit. And then when we see groups like Girl Scouts who have all this plastic wrap around all their cookies and things like that, we love to kind of provide Ridwell to them so they can recycle that instead of have it go to landfills. Technology is a big part of what we do as well, being in Seattle. I think I saw Todd Bishop on the call here who does a great job with GeekWire. So we have developers who kind of create things behind the scenes such that this works in a really seamless way. So there's routing software. We always can see where drivers are in terms of the stops that they're doing. We have some vans like this, which look sort of like the Amazon vans that you might see. And then lastly, we have an app that the drivers use to mark the categories. That does a couple things. It sends out a text message to the people who we pick up from, tells them, thanks for the plastic film and the batteries. Next week's category is backpacks, that type of thing. It really closes the loop quickly to kind of give that positive feedback to people for the great work they're doing to help reduce waste. Also lets us collect all of the data around what is your neighborhood, your household, your city, your county, all that type of stuff. We get that at the household level and at the category level. So lots of phenomenal insights we've seen from that as well. Members love having Ridwell around. This makes it truly worthwhile. To me personally, people like Melissa saying, thank you for what you're doing to make my daughter's future better. Maureen is a Ridwell member in South Seattle that says, you're one of the reasons I have hope for the community, country, and the world, especially, the last 14 months or so have not been the easiest for many people. So if we can provide a little bit of hope for a more promising future, that is amazing to see. And then people that just say, this is inspirational to those of us who value taking care of the planet. So this keeps us motivated, doing more, and trying to serve more people in more ways in the future. There's lots of them. So it's such an amazing thing to see, from a pickup of 5 batteries in Queen Anne, several years ago. There's now almost 35,000 families using Ridwell. If you look at, different communities, this is Queen Anne. Many of those areas are well over 10%, and you can't go too far without seeing bins on people's porches, which is amazing to see how this has caught on and all the impact that's been having so far. And there's lots of it. So we track that data, as I mentioned. Over 2 million pounds have been diverted, and we've gone from my garage to a small warehouse to a big warehouse, and really learned how to scale a lot of these categories. We're now sending 40,000 pounds of plastic film to Nevada, and have learned how to kind of figure that out as we've grown. And just really still the very early days of all of this. We expect these numbers to get even bigger over time. And we continue to add to our service. I think it's important to us not to just be, status quo in this stuff. Things are changing quickly. And so how can we continue to add value to people to reduce waste? New categories is a big reason for that. In Portland, we started there late last year. We learned that clamshell plastics, your berry containers, those were not recyclable through Portland's program as they are here. So we worked really hard on finding a partner for that. We vetted multiple of them. We learned what they did. We discovered all of that. We did a small test and we rolled that out a few weeks ago. And now we're collecting large quantities of clamshell plastics to be recycled into new berry containers. We also look at partnerships. We had a really cool one with Starbucks that was a month or so ago. And so there, even above recycling, what it was doing is moving up to reuse. And so you could request a cup from 4 or 5 West Seattle stores, drink it on the go, take it with you, and then you put it in your Ridwell bin, and we would make sure it was sanitized and delivered back to Starbucks to be reused again. And that's really how we see the future, is a lot more of those reuse opportunities. Finally, on the tech side, we're working really hard on that too. We think an app is something that can really make this work a lot better. We use text messaging, emails, a website, that type of thing, but this is a very much on-the-go, mobile-first service that we think we can add a lot of value to by having that app as a part of it. So that's it. Just wanted to, thank you again for the time. Ridwell, it's, for Seattle, between $10 and $14 a month. for pickups every 2 weeks. And then I created a little code if anyone wanted one amongst your community. There's a website there that can add an extra bonus month as a thank you for being such a great neighbor to my family over the years since we've been here. So with that, actually, I didn't notice the chat, so there are some there, but if anyone had any questions, please let me know. I'd love to answer them. I could go to the chat first, or I could just, people could just speak up too, whatever everyone would prefer.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
I recycle a lot of light bulbs because I recycle for the church. And all of this thing, some places when you buy fluorescents, there's actually a charge on it, supposedly because they're going to take care of it for you. But
Yep.
most of them won't. And when you go in there, oh, well, we only take small light bulbs. We don't take long fluorescents. Or somebody already brought in so many that we can't take them for a week, or all of this kind of stuff. So I don't find that the employer sites, whatever it's called, corporate sites where you take it to work, because I don't need to drive to 7 different sites to get rid of something.
Yep.
And so I find the whole thing very misleading in terms of a program.
Yes, I agree. And that's an example of an extended producer responsibility program. And so that fee that you said, that should provide those options to drive to. That law was several years old. I know they've looked at updating it to provide a better experience. We would love to be a part of that, and we're not though. And so we actually get it to the same spot as those. But I think it's great feedback. I would encourage you to share with the light recycle group in Washington and say you don't have enough options for places to drop off, because that's what that funding mechanism should do, is provide those such that you can do that. And there's not, they do it and they have enough capacity and all that stuff.
But Ryan, you pick those up.
We do, definitely,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, but Ryan, do you pick up 4-foot
We do.
light bulbs?
Yeah. Yep. We just don't, it's not tied to the state program, though we work with the same processor of it.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a similar problem with compost, which maybe isn't you, Ryan, but that is that we have all of these supposed compostable forks and cups and various things like at SeaTac or whatever. But then when you call up Cedar Grove, oh no, we don't compost that because it's not industrial compostable in our site. So the average consumer, when they see the word compostable, has no idea if it's just garbage as far as the composter is concerned or what, because there are no uniform standards.
Yeah, and that's one of those laws that I mentioned that the state of Washington was looking at. I don't think it passed, and this was not this session, but the one prior, about clear labeling for compostables. Huge need, and I 100% agree. It varies from place to place, and there's a lot of greenwashing, as it's referred to there, where you as a restaurant can go on Amazon and buy things that are called compostable, but it may not be with the city that you live in, and so that's a huge challenge in the system. I'm hopeful that the future, if you look 5 years ahead, whatever that might be, and that reusables are really what takes place of those, because there it's a much more closed loop system where there's more controls on it instead of bringing things in and are you wondering what it is. So that's how we hope things evolve into, and that our Starbucks partnership is a great sort of trial of that type of concept.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, it looks like you have 3 questions in the chat, and then I want to add 2 more to them. So
sure.
Do you want me to read those to you? Or do you want...
let me go. Let's see.
The first
okay,
is
so Lisa, who I've known for many years. Hello, Lisa. I remember doing Owen's list pickups from your house. Great to see you. You talk about some of the uses that Ridwell collections go into. So Trex, yes, absolutely. We're very happy to go into as much detail on that as you'd like. So plastic film does go to Trex. And so Trex is a composite lumber maker. And so many people's decks are made of Trex. And so they combine things like sawdust and recycled plastic film. And so you get what look essentially like 2x4s or a different type of lumber that are made out of that, which are a great option in a climate that has rain like we have. So that is where that one goes. Lisa, are there any others in particular that you're interested in?
Well, people, when I'm bragging about Ridwell, which I often do because I do love it, they asked me, well, where did the batteries and the light bulbs go? And I didn't know. So
Yep. So batteries and light bulbs both go to a place called Echo Lights, which is a South Seattle facility. There, like batteries, it's about recovery. What can we get out of those metals, and how can we keep any chemicals from getting into groundwater and soil and those types of things? Light bulbs, there it's about separating glass and metals as well, keeping things safe, and then kind of doing what you can with them to preserve some of those materials such that you're not having to find virgin versions of them all the time.
Thanks.
Next one, is the collection area limited to just Seattle? No, not at all. And I should have had a map or something like that. In the Seattle region where we're in, we go south to Tacoma, and then we go up north to Everett. We go west to Bainbridge Island that we added recently. We go east to Sammamish and Issaquah, Woodinville, places like that. We just added Bellingham way up there. And then we have Portland, the Portland metro area. And we're getting close to Denver as well, if anyone knows anyone in those locations. So think of it as most of the Seattle metro region, as well as some others that are outside of it. Let's see, I have a question. Why do things have to be dry? I think the main one on there is around cardboard. I've heard if it gets really soiled, that it actually can't be used kind of in the same way. But that's a good question. I'd say the more important of that clean, dry, and empty one is the clean one. When I did my MRF tour, I learned that the sort of smell test is one of the first things that buyers will do. So if there's a big bale of plastic and there's a lot of rotting food in it, that will sort of eliminate the whole bale. So really making sure there's not food residue in plastics and paper is really important. The dry one, I think, is mostly to do with cardboard. Next, do you have any places where folks can bring things for collection? Asking from a condo building. Not currently. That is something we get asked about a fair amount. So it's kind of on our roadmap to think through, are there ways to do that? Most of the things that we offer, there are places to take them to, and we're happy to sort of serve people to those. We do serve a lot of condo buildings in different ways. Sometimes it's just a unit signing up and perhaps even sharing it with an adjacent unit. We also have pilots running in about 6 or 7 buildings where the whole building uses it together. And so that's a slightly different version of Ridwell. Instead of the bin, there are larger containers for film or threads or batteries, light bulbs. So if either of those are of interest, let us know, and hopefully we can find a way to serve your building. I had a list as well. I think that covers the chats.
let me tack on a question to Jackie's, and that is, I was curious, have you had any organizations like churches where we could have a Ridwell bin and invite our parishioners periodically to come and contribute?
Yes, we actually do have. There's one a church on Mercer Island that uses Ridwell. I think they might have 2 bins just for sort of the size and stuff like that. We don't have like a church specific version. So, think, what the size of the bin is, what the bags are. So we're open to creative solutions about how that might work, whether it's 1 bin, 2 bins, whatever that looks like. The communication goes to sort of one person. So there'd sort of need to be a coordinator on your side to opt in for pickups and those types of things, but certainly open to it. So yeah, love it. Talk amongst yourselves and let us know how.
Yeah, I love that idea. The other question I want to ask you, and I also would like to ask this of Socorro, how do you offset the environmental impact that comes with the recycling process itself? So you have to drive these materials to various places. In what ways are you trying to offset that I guess you could call it counter impact?
Yeah, great question. So in our case, we've done some studies around sort of the net impact of these pickups. If you saw that map of Queen Anne, for example, you park once and you can do 8 stops. Well, if there was no Ridwell, we know some portion of those people would take their things to Goodwill, take their things to their batteries to this place, take their plastic home to the grocery store. And so we think we're actually reducing mileage because we're doing many people's stuff together. We also have offset our carbon impact through a group called 3 Degrees, I think they're called, that buys carbon offsets for that. Lastly, we're very aware and anxious to see how we could bring electric vehicles into our fleet, where there would be even, no carbon at all to offset, because it would be sort of neutral, especially if we had green power that would be providing that electricity as we have in this area.
Wow, great.
I'll chime in too. So for SPU, we actually partner with the companies that do the collection. We have contracts with them, and our contracts specified what kind of technologies need to be used and what kind of fuels the trucks need to be used. And so we're actually pushing the envelope of what kind of trucks, and we're using now hybrid trucks, and we're starting to pilot some electric vehicles. So so that's one way that we're pushing the industry. And then also we have every 5 to 6 years, we have a solid waste management plan, and we use pretty advanced environmental models to figure out what's the impact and what are the benefits from recycling. So we can do a comparison of recycling versus landfill disposal versus other different disposals. So that's how we account for the impact. But as far as I know, we don't we don't buy carbon credits or things like that yet.
All right, well, we are just past the 11 o'clock hour. I want to thank both Ryan and Socorro again. This was, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we just had several discussions with a professor at the University of Washington that give us a kind of global perspective. But this is so inspiring to see the things we can do on a local level. So thank you both, not only for being here, but for doing the work that you do. This was truly a wonderful forum presentation. Thanks. Yes. And I also, again, want to thank Susan for coordinating today's conversation. And finally, Carol Ann. And Carol Ann and I will be hosting the last forum, and that's 2 weeks from now. We'll be skipping next Sunday. It's Father's Day, but 2 weeks from now, where we would like you to join us at 10 o'clock to get your suggestions on forum topics for the coming year. So please do join us for that. Also, one more thing, today at 11:30 for our coffee hour, we'll be welcoming at least a few of our 7 new members at Queen Anne Lutheran. So if you can join us for that, we would love to see you there. Thanks again, everyone, for a great discussion today, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.